Isaac Newton invented calculus, unlocked the laws of gravity, and changed science forever. But he also destroyed careers, drove rivals to madness, and may have poisoned himself experimenting with mercury. The greatest scientific mind in history had a soul consumed by darkness. We celebrate his genius. We ignore his cruelty. Today, we explore both. As his rival Robert Hooke once said, Newton is the most fearsome man in England. He wasn't talking about intellect. He was talking about vengeance, genius, madness, revenge. What you're about to discover will forever change how you see the father of modern physics. The lonely boy. Isaac Newton was born on Christmas Day, 1642, in a small English village called Woolsthorpe. He was so premature, so tiny, that his mother said he could fit inside a quart mug. His father had died 3 months before his birth, but the real wound came later. When Isaac was just 3 years old, his mother remarried and left him behind. She moved away to live with her new husband, abandoning young Isaac to be raised by his grandmother. For 8 years, he barely saw her. I was left to be brought up by my grandmother. Can you imagine being abandoned by your own mother at age 3? Psychologists today call this an attachment trauma. Newton never recovered from it. He grew up isolated, socially awkward, unable to form close relationships. He made lists of his sins as a teenager, including one that said he wished his stepfather's house would burn down with his mother inside. This wasn't just childhood anger, abandoned, wounded forever. This was the birth of a pattern that would define his entire life. The boy who couldn't trust anyone would become a man who trusted no one. But this isolation would also become his greatest weapon. Rage in Cambridge. At Cambridge University, Newton was a sizar, the lowest class of student required to serve wealthier classmates in exchange for education. He was bullied, he was mocked, and he never forgot a single insult. In his private notebooks, he kept detailed lists of everyone who wronged him. Names, dates, offenses, all cataloged with terrifying precision. He was building a ledger of vengeance. But something else was happening in Cambridge. Newton was teaching himself everything. He read Descartes, Galileo, Kepler. He questioned everything his professors taught. By age 23, he had invented calculus. By 26, he understood gravity. He built the first reflecting telescope. He discovered that white light contains all colors. He did all this in 18 months during a plague that closed the university. The greatest burst of scientific creativity in human history happened in isolation. If this is changing how you see scientific genius, hit like and subscribe, because Newton's story gets much darker from here. But here's the strange part. Newton told almost no one. He hoarded his discoveries like treasure. Secrets, power, control. And this paranoid secrecy would soon ignite the most vicious scientific war in history. The Hooke War. Robert Hooke was one of England's most brilliant scientists. He discovered cells. He helped rebuild London after the Great Fire. He was respected, accomplished, and made one fatal mistake. He criticized Isaac Newton. In 1672, Newton published his theory of light and colors. Hooke disagreed publicly. He suggested improvements. This was normal scientific discourse, but Newton took it as a declaration of war. Newton withdrew from public scientific life for almost a decade. He nursed his grudge in silence. Then, when Hooke claimed he had thought of gravity first, Newton went nuclear. He systematically erased Hooke from history. When Newton became president of the Royal Society, the only known portrait of Hooke mysteriously vanished. If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants. Historians believe this famous quote was actually an insult. Hooke was short and hunched. Newton was mocking his enemy's physical deformity while pretending to be humble. Petty, cruel, deliberate. The greatest scientist alive spent decades destroying a colleague's reputation. But Hooke was just the beginning. Calculus warfare. Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz was a German genius who invented calculus independently around the same time as Newton. In a reasonable world, both men would have been celebrated. But Newton's world was not reasonable. Newton launched a campaign to prove Leibniz was a plagiarist. He used his position as Royal Society president to stack an investigating committee with his own allies. He secretly wrote the committee's final report himself. The report declared Newton the sole inventor and branded Leibniz a thief. Newton then published the report anonymously and wrote anonymous reviews praising it. He was judge, jury, prosecutor, and anonymous witness in his own case. The feud consumed both men's final years. Leibniz died in 1716, his reputation in ruins. Newton reportedly said he took great satisfaction in breaking Leibniz's heart. Think about this. The man who explained how the universe works spent his energy destroying a fellow mathematician over credit. Genius does not guarantee goodness. We worship Newton's mind, but his character was something far darker. And yet, we haven't reached the strangest chapter of his life. Mercury madness. Here's something your physics textbook never mentioned. Isaac Newton spent more time on alchemy than on physics. He wrote over 1,000,000 words about turning lead into gold, finding the philosopher's stone, and decoding ancient mystical secrets. He wasn't just curious. He was obsessed. He built furnaces in his chambers at Cambridge. He worked through the night, heating mercury, arsenic, and lead. He tasted his experiments. Mercury arsenic madness. Modern analysis of Newton's hair found mercury levels 40 times higher than normal. In 1693, Newton had a complete mental breakdown. He accused his few friends of plotting against him. He wrote bizarre, paranoid letters. He couldn't sleep for weeks. I have neither ate nor slept well this 12-month. Historians now believe he was suffering from mercury poisoning. The same hands that wrote the Principia were stirring pots of liquid poison. Poisoned, the greatest scientific mind in history may have driven himself mad through his obsession with the occult. Yet somehow, he recovered, and his next career would reveal a cruelty we haven't even touched yet. Executioner Newton. In 1696, Newton left academia to run England's Royal Mint. It seemed like a ceremonial position. Newton turned it into something terrifying. Counterfeiting was a serious crime in England, but enforcement was lax. Newton changed that. He personally hunted counterfeiters through London's underworld. He hired informants. He interrogated suspects himself. He used disguises to gather evidence in taverns and brothels. The professor became an executioner. Newton sent dozens of men to the gallows. He watched some of them hang. One counterfeiter named William Challoner was particularly clever, repeatedly escaping prosecution through connections and charm. Newton spent years building a case against him. Hunt, capture, execute. When Challoner was finally convicted, Newton made sure there was no mercy. Challoner was hanged, drawn, and quartered in 1699. Newton attended the execution. The man who discovered light watched men die in darkness. Was this justice? Or was it the same vindictive streak that destroyed Hooke and Leibniz, now with the power of life and death? The pattern was undeniable. No love allowed. Isaac Newton died a virgin. He never married. He never had children. As far as historians can tell, he never had a romantic relationship of any kind. This wasn't religious devotion. This was pathological avoidance. Remember that 3-year-old boy abandoned by his mother? He built walls around his heart that lasted 84 years. Newton had exactly one close friendship in his life, with a young Swiss mathematician named Nicolas Faycio de Duillier. When Faycio suddenly ended their friendship in 1693, Newton's mental breakdown followed almost immediately. I am extremely troubled at the embroilment I am in. Some historians believe their relationship may have been romantic. Others think Newton simply couldn't handle any emotional connection. Either way, after Faycio left, Newton never let anyone close again. Alone always forever. He surrounded himself with admirers, not friends. He demanded reverence, not affection. The man who explained how bodies attract each other across space could never allow another body near his own heart. This isolation wasn't accidental. It was chosen. Religious heresy. Newton wrote more about religion than science, and what he believed would have gotten him killed. He was a secret Arian, rejecting the Holy Trinity that defined Christianity. He believed Jesus was not equal to God but was a created being. In 17th century England, this was serious heresy. Heretic, Newton hid his beliefs his entire life. He held a position at Cambridge that required him to be ordained as an Anglican priest. He got a special exemption from the king rather than take vows he didn't believe. He spent decades studying biblical chronology, trying to prove that the Catholic Church had corrupted true Christianity. Hidden faith dangerous. He calculated the date of the apocalypse, writing that the world would end no earlier than 2060. This I mention not to assert when the time of the end shall be, but to put a stop to the rash conjectures of fanciful men. The father of rational science was obsessed with prophecy. The man who explained planetary motion believed he was decoding God's hidden messages. Even the greatest minds contain contradictions we cannot explain. Newton lived a double life, public genius, private heretic, and he took most of these secrets to his grave. Power corrupts. When Newton became president of the Royal Society in 1703, he ruled it like a dictator for the next 24 years until his death. He moved meetings to locations only he could access easily. He decided what papers got published. He crushed dissent. Astronomer John Flamsteed spent decades cataloging the stars, the most important astronomical project in England. Newton demanded access to his data before Flamsteed was ready. When Flamsteed refused, Newton used his position to force publication of an incomplete, error-filled version. He stole another scientist's lifework. Flamsteed spent years trying to buy back and destroy the unauthorized copies. He called Newton a robber and an arrogant tyrant. Control, dominate, destroy. Newton didn't care. He had the power, he used it. When genius gains authority, the world should tremble. This is the pattern we've seen throughout Newton's life. Abandonment created isolation. Isolation created brilliance. But brilliance without empathy created a monster who happened to also be the smartest person alive. But there's one final chapter that reveals everything. Death of genius. Isaac Newton died on March 31, 1727 at age 84. He was rich. He was famous. He was alone. In his final years, he grew paranoid that enemies were still plotting against him. He revised his books obsessively, removing any acknowledgement of rivals. He made sure history would remember him as the sole genius. I do not know what I may appear to the world, but to myself, I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore. Was this humility, or a final manipulation of his legacy? His funeral was attended by lords and scientists. Voltaire was there, marveling that England buried a scientist like a king. But no family mourned him, no wife. No children, no close friends. He left behind a fortune and a mystery. His private papers, including the Alchemy and Heresy, were sealed and hidden for over 200 years. When economists finally read them in the 1930s, John Maynard Keynes declared Newton was not the first of the age of reason. He was the last magician. The genius who explained the universe was also a wounded child, a vengeful enemy, a secret heretic, and a ruthless tyrant. Isaac Newton gave us the laws that govern the physical universe, but his own internal universe was governed by darkness. Abandonment taught him to trust no one. Isolation gave him the focus to achieve what no one else could. But that same isolation turned him cruel, paranoid, and vindictive. Genius is not goodness. We separate scientists from their humanity. We put their equations on pedestals and ignore their sins. But Newton shows us that brilliance and cruelty can live in the same mind, that the hand writing the Principia could also sign death warrants, that the eyes seeing further than any human before could also watch enemies hang. To every action, there is always opposed an equal reaction. Perhaps his own third law explains his life. Every wound created an equal force of genius. Every betrayal created an equal capacity for cruelty. If you made it this far, comment third LAW if Newton's story changed how you see genius. The truth is never comfortable, but it is always worth knowing. History has more to teach us. Subscribe if you want to learn what they never taught you in school.